So, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this February Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub. I am your host and the facilitator and the convener of the meeting, and my name is. Could I ask that we all please mute? Please let's all mute our phones so we can. Please let's all mute our phones so that we can all have a good time tonight, so that we can all enjoy the meeting. Thank you for doing that. Right. Okay. So I'm Dr. T. Ayodele Ajayi. I'm the convener of the Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub, and I'm so delighted to have you join us this evening at the February edition of the Wellbeing Hub. Thank you for coming on time, and we're just going to get started. Today's theme is on toxic relationships, recognition, and recovery. Right. So, Tripart Care Hub is an emotional well-being hub, and basically, the ethos of the club of this hub is to really give emotional well-being support to our community. Over the we started this just soon after the lockdown started. And that was because it was apparent that there were people who were having difficulties coping with their mental well-being during the lockdown, and a lot of people were having difficult experiences in terms of their emotional health. And that's how they started. And over the period, in June 2021, which was last June, we actually had a 4 weeks intensive course, which was the Tripart Care Wellbeing Hub. And thereafter, since October, we've been having a monthly hub. We usually meet on the last Thursday of the month, and it's usually online. So if you find that you like what you see today, please then feel free to subsequently join us. Usually, the meetings are advertised on all my social media hubs, and that's where to get to know about the meetings. So a bit about me. As I said, I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I've been working in the NHS in psychiatry for the last 22 years. And in addition to that, I've also been privileged to occupy a number of roles that have actually enabled me to be able to do what I do now. I'm very much passionate about public mental health, and that's something that I really enjoy doing. But also, I also have a number of medical education roles in terms of I'm the regional medical education, undergraduate education lead in a region of my trust. That means I'm responsible for coordinating delivery and delivering content of medical school to medical students who are in their psychiatric placement and organizing those placements. In addition to that, you also do know that a lot of you know that I also run a mentoring organization for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who would like to go to medical school. So we run a mentoring scheme where young people are supported with their medical school application, and with a view to then support them as well to be able to make a successful entry into medical school. The other roles I occupy, I sit on a number of charities, board of charities, and also chair a couple of them. In addition to that, today's topic is particularly very interesting, and I feel that I'm actually coming from a place of experience in terms of having been able to interact with a lot of people in that regard. And also the experience I bring, having the responsibility for the young people. I'm on the pastoral team of my church, and that means that I have my remit is for young people. And I've also, along with my wife, had the privilege of being able to conduct pre-marriage classes for a number of young people who are preparing for marriage. So all of those experiences, I'm hoping that I'm bringing to the table today, and that everyone is going to have a fruitful time. It's going to be worth your while for coming. So that's a bit about us. The Tripart Care module, Tripart Care, it's actually two words merged into one. It means three, which is tri, and part. Basically, Tripart Care, I'm very open about the fact that my Christian faith actually shapes a lot of my views in terms of the way I see life. And one of the models from that Christian faith is the fact that we are human beings made up of our bodies. We also have a soul, which is our emotional part, and we also have a spirit, which is the spirit, the part of what that connects with the supernatural. And it's very important to now say that actually in the Royal College of Psychiatrists is actually acknowledging the fact that we as psychiatrists need to be paying attention to the spiritual needs of our patients, or to the spiritual needs of the community that we serve, because there was a recent survey by the Royal College of Psychiatrists that actually showed that there's a spiritual dimension too, that our client group actually would like us to address their spiritual needs, which is quite interesting. Right, so what are we going to get through today? We've got quite a very big agenda. What are toxic emotions? You see, everybody talks about toxic emotions. What are they really? In the real sense, what are they? How can you find out whether you're in a toxic relationship? Sorry, I said toxic emotions. I meant toxic relationship. What are toxic relationships? What are the toxic relationship red flags? Because you know that in my experience as a psychiatrist, and my experience generally in life, is that really, when you see people who are in a toxic relationship, when you see a toxic relationship, particularly if it's a long-term relationship, when you speak with the people who are involved, many times the warning signs were there all from the outset. It's just that they weren't picked up. So what are the red flags for toxic relationships? I'm glad that there are quite a lot of parents who are in here today, as well as young people, because one of the roles of one of the things that is important in community is that there can be generational exchange, where the older people can actually pass on experience and can actually support younger people in their life decisions and their life experiences. So I'm happy that there are parents here today, there are counselors, there are coaches, there are mentors who can actually support younger people in their decision making in terms of bouncing ideas off them. So we're going to also cover psychological weapons of toxicity. What are the weapons that feature? What are the emotional exchanges that take place in toxic relationships? And how can you objectively assess your relationships? Many times, young people say, should I quit or should I quit? Is this somebody I should be thinking about a long-term relationship with, or is this going to be toxic for my future? Should I really be leaving or should I be staying? And today, I'm hoping that we can cover that, looking at your relationships, and then boundary setting. That's really very powerful. How do you set healthy boundaries in your relationship? And that's not just for young adults, it's actually for everyone. We all need to set our boundaries in our relationships to remain healthy. And then what's the toxicity recovery plan? If you've been in a toxic relationship or you're just recovering from one, how do you recover yourself? How do you come back to the place where you can engage emotionally again in a very safe and sensitive and healthy way? And then I'm going to share some very relevant resources, and then we are going to take some questions and answers. And if at any time during the session you have a question, please just indicate by raising your hands, and then I can. There is some background noise. Please let's mute our assets. Please mute yourself so everybody can have an interesting experience of this. Please. So a toxic relationship is basically a relationship that is toxic in terms of it's harmful to your physical, to your emotional, to your financial or spiritual or social well-being. That's what a toxic relationship is. And the first point I want to make this evening is that a toxic relationship is not necessarily an emotional or intimate relationship. It's not restricted to intimate relationships. So it's not restricted to people who are married. It's not restricted to people who are in a relationship in terms of who are courting, or it's not restricted to boyfriend-girlfriend relationships. It actually spans across the playground in terms of relationships between friends can be toxic. Relationship in the workplace can be toxic. That's why I put boardroom there. Relationships among couples can be toxic. Relationships in families can be toxic. You can have a toxic relationship with a sibling or an auntie or an uncle or a cousin. Such relationships can be toxic. And I've put a crash there because parenting relationship, there's toxic parenting as well. And I'm glad that there are parents who are on the call tonight, because really toxic parenting is something that I'm really very passionate about putting information out there. Because when we are toxic as in a parenting style, we're actually creating trouble not only for the now but for the future. because basically we are raising children who are then going to be emotionally damaged, and they are going to go on to become emotionally damaged, but not only to become emotionally damaged, to actually raise children who are also emotionally damaged. And for those who might be interested in content of that, I wrote an article for Testify magazine. One of the things I didn't say was that I'm also a columnist. I write a mental column every month for Testify newspaper, which is a London community newspaper. And in that, if you check them on their website, I wrote an article called "What Children Need to Become Emotionally Balanced Adults." What children need to become emotionally balanced and socially adjusted adults. So that would be an article to check out. So toxic relationships, as I said, they cut across board. It's not just about intimate relationships. And the thing to note about them is that they are marked with conflict, competition, and control. If you can see any of these features in any relationship that you are in, conflict, there's regular conflict, there's competition, there's control, you may actually be in a toxic relationship. You need to look further. Bottom line, the bottom line in terms of deciding whether I'm in a toxic relationship or not is, does this relationship add value to me, or is it depleting me? That's you see, many times I see people, the toxicity is they are staring you in the face because you can see all these signs, but people are still asking, oh, is this relationship good for me? Should I continue with this friendship? Should I really? It's there staring us in the face. It's apparent that there's toxicity here and that this is not adding to you. So if it's not adding from you to you and it's taken from you in such a way that you're feeling depleted, you're feeling unsupported, you're feeling misunderstood, demeaned, attacked, or drained, then you are most probably in a toxic relationship. And one acid test is, how do you feel in your energy levels in terms of your emotional energy and your physical energy when you've interacted in that relationship? If it's a relationship that by the time you interact, you're like, oh, I need to go to bed. I need to go to bed in terms of either you feel emotionally drained or you feel physically drained, then there might be some toxicity in that relationship. And then the other thing is that at its worst, toxic relationships actually threaten physical, psychological, social, spiritual, and financial well-being. It boils down to the fact that one of the questions to ask ourselves is, well, what's this relationship doing to me? What's this friendship doing to me? Is it adding to me, or is it taking away from me? Right. Okay. So I just wanted to pop on the charts to see, to see what's going on there. So that's basically what toxic relationships are. And I hope that as I'm talking, you are thinking, reviewing your relationships, and thinking about what that means for you. Right. So this is our first exercise. Like I said, we try to make this as interactive as possible. And this is your first exercise. And I'd like you to please start typing in the chat. The question is this. It's a true or false answer. So you can either type true or false. The question is, being in an intimate relationship is linked to longevity, good health, and better life expectancy. I am a psychiatrist, and I encourage you to please read the question very carefully. So being in an intimate relationship is linked to longevity, good health, and better life expectancy. So please, I'm quite keen to hear from you. Okay, somebody says true, false, true, definitely false, false. Okay. Okay, absolutely yes, false, not really true. Okay, true. Okay, false. Okay, false. Okay, right. Okay, not really. That's an interesting one. Actually, false. Okay, right. So I'm quite keen. One of the people that said, could I have somebody, one of those who said yes to that question, to please tell me, to unmute themselves and tell me why they think it's a yes. Being in an intimate relationship is linked to longevity, good health, and better life expectancy. One of the yes, people who typed in yes, please tell me why you think it is a yes. Don't worry. There are no. It's okay to attempt the question. So it's a very safe place. So I'm keen for what Jem and B. Please let's allow people to unmute themselves now. So let's have somebody who says you think it's a yes, that being in an intimate relationship is linked to longevity, good health, and better life expectancy. Please unmute yourself and tell us why you think it's a yes. Okay, yes, we can, yes.
Yeah, well, I just look at the word intimate,
right.
It's a very positive word.
Okay.
And that can, be a positive thing and then result in, longevity, good health, and better life expectancy. So just
right, thank you.
You cannot be in an intimate relationship and then be abusive to your partner. So that's my own take.
Right, thank you. I like the fact that you've used the word can. I like that word. I like the fact that you use the word can, because I agree with you that it can be. So thank you for that. Yes. I think I deliberately phrased the sentence that way. So it's not said anything about whether the relationship is positive or negative. The reality is that positive, intimate relationships, and intimate is not necessarily physical. There are emotional relationships that there's no physical contact involved, but there is in terms of being able to bear your heart emotionally. Now, the reality is that toxic relationships, even when they're intimate, are actually linked to income, to compromise lifestyle, reduce longevity. So the fact that whatever chronic close relationships that are chronically unhappy are linked to various health conditions, and that's the point I want to make. In fact, there was a British civil service study. 9,000 people were studied. That's quite a large study. They found out that when they studied, this was in 2007. They found out that when people were studied, those who reported that their close relationships, not necessarily, it could be friendship, it could be family, it could be a spousal relationship, that those who actually reported that those relationships were that they were not satisfied in them, they had a 34% increased risk of heart problems. Not only so, they also showed that people who are in prolonged conflicts in relationships was linked to reduced self-reported health and more health issues. So the more aggrieved you are in your relationships, the more likely you are to have physical and mental problems. That's quite interesting. So that's why toxicity is not something to be played around with. When people are chronically stressed as a result of relationships, and relationships in my clinical practice, relationships are found out as being one of the commonest reasons why people complain about chronic stress. It's very, very common, and it could be work bullying. It could be all sorts of relationships where you have close contact with somebody or a group of people, but it's perpetually giving you aggros. And when that happens, it needs to be addressed because it's not good for your health in any way. So the other thing, I think the point has been made already. Research also shows that when somebody is in an intimate relationship in which both parties have different ways of resolving or coping with anger, when there's resentment, when anger is unresolved, that both people actually carry a higher risk of earlier death. That's also quite profound. And the other thing they found was that relationship aggros, relationship acts have been associated have been linked to precipitating depressive illnesses and anxiety. So really, these are the reasons why it's important to actually to address these issues. Then, of course, we also do know that the other thing that the research shows us is that there's a link between the person that you're closely linked with, particularly a partner, can actually affect your health and lifestyle choices. That if you are, for instance, if you are trying to live healthy in terms of if you are trying to address obesity, alcohol use, and drug use, that if you have a supportive partner in that relationship, you are more likely to achieve your goals than if you have a partner that's bringing you down by doing exactly the same thing that you're trying to run away from. So all of this can help us to actually assess our relationships and to think about what impacts those relationships are having on our lives. Okay, right. So let's move on very quickly. Right. This slide is one that I feature almost all the time in my presentations, and that's because this is all about mental health, it's about emotional well-being. And the reason I feature this slide is because when you look at this slide, it's very busy, and you're wondering, mental health is in the middle of it, but what exactly is mental health? Is it suicide? Is it grief? Is it stigma? Is it cognitive? Is it drugs? Is it anxiety? What exactly is mental health at the end of the day? The reality is that mental health is actually a state. It's not just an absence of mental illnesses, and I think that's profound. So there are people who say, "Yeah, I've not had a breakdown. My mind is together, so that means I'm mentally well." But maybe not necessarily so. So basically, mental health is a state of. It's not just according to the WHO, the World Health Organization. Mental health is not just an absence of mental illness. It's actually a state of well-being in which an individual is able to realize or fulfill their potentials. They are able to cope with the normal stresses of life. So, for instance, there might be somebody who is in a toxic relationship, for instance, but they are managing that relationship in a way that is not taking a toll on their mental health. And we're going to go to that. How do you manage toxic relationship that you have to, that you can't stop being somebody's sister or somebody's brother or somebody's son or somebody's dad because it's toxic. So you can't stop. There's a way you can manage those relationships. So they're able to cope with the normal stresses of life. They're able to work productively, and they're able to make a fruitful contribution to community. So every time I go into consultation, those are the things I'm looking for. Is this person in a state of well-being? Are they maximizing their potential? Are they coping with the normal stresses of life, in the strong stresses of life that life is throwing at them? Are they working productively and fruitfully? And are they making a contribution to society? And the other thing we do know about mental health is that the other thing we do know about mental health is this, that mental health is also a spectrum. people say it's not just about I'm mentally well or not mentally unwell. It's not like that. It's not a fixed state. It's a spectrum, and people tend to move along that spectrum depending on what's happening in their lives at that particular time and depending on how they're coping with it. So you have people who state of being healthy, that's right at the other extreme, where you're on top of the ladder and everything is going well. You're fulfilling, you're ticking all the 4 boxes that we spoke about earlier. And then there's a place where people are just coping. Maybe life has thrown stress at you, the lockdown has taken place, somebody's lost their job, or they're actually in a toxic relationship, and they've just met somebody. Maybe it's a new friendship or a new boss, or they've just been or they've just met a new partner, or the relationship has turned sour, or they are in or maybe they've moved into a new community and there's a perpetually hostile neighbor. There is a relationship that's stressing them out. But because they've got coping skills, maybe because there's another supportive neighbor, there's a supportive parent, there's a supportive friend, or there's a counselor they're speaking to, they're coping. They're not at their best, but they're not broken. They're not stretched. However, if all of those coping skills or some of those coping skills are removed, then they begin to struggle. And they begin to struggle because things begin to, it's like you are juggling so many balls in the air and you begin to drop 1 or 2 of them. You begin to socially isolate yourself. Maybe it's affecting sleep, it's affecting appetite, maybe it's affecting your life choices. Maybe people are turning to alcohol or drugs or using other things to cope. It could be even using things like using television, using social media to cope. Eventually, if attention is not paid to that issue, what's then going to happen is from struggling, missing work, sleeping late at night, not being able to sleep, staying up worrying. From struggling, people can actually become unwell, in which they have a breakdown. They are not able to function at all in community or in society again. They are not able to fulfill their duties. So it's always that's what the mental spectrum is like. And then, so in terms of what are the toxic relationship red flags? Because I think that's really something that is important for us to look at. So, one, if you're in a relationship, remember that relationship here is a loose word. Relationship here is not necessarily, we are not talking about just intimate relationships in terms of it's across board. If you're in a relationship in which there's lack of support, you are not getting holistic support in terms of emotional, physical, mental, spiritual, financial support, you need to look at that relationship, because that might be a sign of toxicity, particularly if the support is actually being deliberately withheld. When that person is in a position to support you, but they are not supporting. The other thing to look out for will be presence of toxic emotions, anger, jealousy, envy, resentment, and that is very closely linked. The envy, the jealousy is closely linked to controlling behavior. When they send you a text, even if you're at work, you need to answer right now. If you don't answer in 5 minutes, another text comes in, or when you're out with your friends, he's on the phone or she's on the phone, wanting to know your every move and every minute of what you are doing. If that's happening, and you can feel that, you almost feel stifled. It's like you almost feel like emotionally stifled. That might actually be an indication that you are dealing with a toxic relationship. Habitually blaming or putting you down, disrespecting your values. And I know there are young people in the room today. There are people possibly young adults. And one of the things I said earlier today was that as a result, one of the roles that my wife and I play is that we sometimes support young people in their premarital classes. One of the things we say at those classes is, your values, you should be sure that your values match. Because if your values don't match, then there can be trouble in the future. And if you can see the telltale signs now that the values don't match. For instance, when we talk about boundaries, we'll talk about this as well. For instance, very simple values in terms of, okay, my value, my moral value, and my moral point of view, and based on my faith is that I'm a wait till marriage person. I'm a no sex before marriage person. If you're in a relationship with somebody who's pushing that boundary and putting pressure on you to change that value, then maybe it's something to consider. Maybe it's time to step back and think that what other values of mine are going to be pushed when the relationship progresses. When there's dishonesty and transparency, I see this a lot among young people, and sometimes also among older people. So he doesn't want to, or she doesn't want to introduce you to any of her friends. She doesn't want you to meet any of our family. She doesn't want to feature you on any of our social media platforms or social media platforms. In fact, your relationship is in secrecy. If that's happening, and they are making efforts to actually conceal that relationship, it's an alarm bell that it might be toxic. And the other extreme of that pole is when they isolate you from your family, they isolate you from your friends. They just want to have an exclusive right to you. That might also be because that might be controlling behavior, and it is a sign of toxicity. When you walk on eggshells around them, you are not really yourself. You feel like you are intimidated and you're just treading on eggshells. When the relationship is such that it's making you not attend to your personal needs, you are neglecting yourself, you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, you're always ruminating and worrying, it might be signs of toxicity. When there's a toxic style of communication, sarcasm, backtalk, when you hear about things about yourself from somebody that the person you are in a relationship with or in a friendship with, or a family member has back talked about you, all of those are toxic communication styles. Very key one, when they are never wrong. In relationships, if we are in a relationship for long enough, a friendship, a marriage, a courtship, seeing each other, boss, subordinate relationship, we will step on each other's toes. But if that person is never wrong and they never apologize, then that might also be a sign that you are in a toxic zone. So currently, very quickly, I said that one of the things we are going to do today is that we're going to look at the structured objective ways of assessing your relationship. And this is the relationship assessment scale, which was devised in put together in 1988, so it's been around for quite a while. Is a good tool to use. It's 7 questions, and you rate yourself on a Likert scale from 0 to 5. 0 is the least score, and 5 is the best score. And what this has found out, it was initially devised for couples, but however, it's now progressed even beyond that, where they've done some studies to show that actually it can be used in other relationships, friendships. It can be used in family relationships. It can also be used in professional relationships to assess the quality, just by adapting it. So the question is, how well does your partner or the other person meet your needs? And if you must know how well they meet your needs, you must know your needs. Because one of the things I always say in terms of assessing relationships and the quality of the relationship is, what am I bringing in? What exactly am I bringing into the relationship myself? How am I? What am I bringing in? Because if I don't know what I'm bringing in, if I don't know what my needs are, then it's very difficult for me to be able to actually express those needs and to be able to see whether they are being met or they are not being met. So it's very important. So how well are my needs being met? In general, how well am I satisfied with the relationship? How do I feel really satisfied with the relationship? How good is it compared with others? And I think that's one that one has to take with a pinch of salt, because you need to set your own standards. And then, to what extent has your relationship met your original expectation? Usually, the reality is that when we go into any relationship, at the back of our minds, we are looking at what we are going to contribute, but in the reality, there is mutuality as well. What is it that I'm getting from this? And is it when I aimed to go into this, when we wanted to start off, what was my intention? And is that intention being met? Am I feeling fulfilled in terms of where we are? And the other thing is, how much do I love the person? How much if it's a friendship, how much do I regard the person? How much do I like the person? And then, how many problems are there here? Because really, if we sit down, step back, and assess relationships, many times the reason why we cannot see the toxicity is because we are not being objective. If we just have a little tool like this to really put pen to paper and write things down, it will be there right in your face, staring you in the face. It's just so easy. You can really look at it on paper and say, oh my God, how come I've been so blind-spotted? How come I've been so blindsided all along? Because it's there. It's black and white. And this is a very simple tool to use in terms of assessing the relationship. So basically, the Likert scale is actually the Likert scale that I described earlier is actually it's a spectrum from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Strongly disagreeing being 0, and then strongly agree being 5. I can see here, okay, Mrs. Oshin, I can see you've put up your hands, you've raised your hands. Please, let's hear you. Please unmute yourself and.
Oh, I didn't. I think it's from the last time.
Oh, all right, okay,
that.
Yeah, that's fine. It looks like it's a legacy hand. Right, okay. So now, with this in mind, in fact, I encourage you to please take a photo of this. And the reason why I'm encouraging you to take a photo is because the next slide is going to be a reflective one. We are going to do some reflective work. We are going to think about our own relationships and look at and assess them. Particularly if it's a relationship that you've been wondering, what am I bringing in here? What is this person bringing in? Is this a friendship I should really continue with? Is this somebody I should be really close to? That will help you. So I'm going to ask you to please take a photo of this so that you can then, on the next slide, you can then do the reflective work. Right. Okay. So I expect that. So let's move on to the next slide. It says pause and reflect. So this, and I encourage everyone to please do this. It's the reason why we are doing it. Reflect on your own relationships based on what you know now. Write down any warning signs you may identify and in which relationships they exist. Yeah. Don't worry, you're not going to share it with anyone. It's really for your own reflection. It's really for you to reflect and to think through things, particularly in relationships that you may not have been sure. Maybe, yeah, it could even be a work relationship, a toxic work environment, because it's not just individuals that you have toxic relationships with. Sometimes they're actually toxic work environments, and if people continue for long enough in them, they're actually damaging their potentials in several ways. So it's also important to bear that in mind. So let's just thank you, Penny. So let's just do that, and we can just spend the next few minutes. Let's spend the next few minutes doing that and looking at our relationships. Right. So, what are the psychological weapons that people use in relationships, in toxic relationships? What are the psychological weapons that when you find you know that this is toxic? Bullying is one of them. I've made an example. When people are coercive, when you feel that when people are coercive and you are being forced or being emotionally driven to do things that is not in agreement with your values, then that is certainly a psychological weapon that is toxic to you, and it's one of the toxic things, weapons of people of the abuser. And the other thing to note is that it's not all the time that relationships, that toxic relationships are meant intentionally abusive. Sometimes it's just that the other person does not realize even what they are doing to you, and that's why it's important for you to define your own. And we're going to come to boundary settings very soon. That's why it's important for you to define what are my needs in this relationship. Are they being met? And if they are not being met, then it's very important to have that open conversation. It's very, very important. Gaslighting is another one. Gaslighting is when somebody is in a relationship with you. Remember, we are not talking about just intimate relationships here. It's lose in terms of relationship. When somebody who is in a relationship with you is actually gaslighting in terms of they are twisting information that they are giving you. They are deliberately giving you information that is wrong. They are basically playing mind games. Mind games to the point in which you question your own feelings, you question your own judgment, and you question your own sanity. Gaslighting is called. It's very, very common in abusive relationships, and it's a weapon that abusers use. When that is happening, there are no doubts about it. You are in a toxic relationship, and you need to do something about it, because if you don't, you are damaging yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and you are also creating problems for your future, because it also damages self-esteem as well as self-confidence. Fear and discrimination. When you feel intimidated, when it's particularly if it's a professional relationship and there's intimidation, they are being threatened for consequences by the boss, then that's unhealthy. Splitting is when you set one against the other. So one of the things that people who are deliberately being toxic in a relationship do is that they try to alienate you from the supportive relationships in your life, and what they do is they then set you against those relationships. So they say things about you and then say things about them to you, so that they knock your heads together. And in that case, that's also a toxic. It's also toxic. Martyrdom is about playing the victim. So you see, the last 10 boyfriends that I've had have left me. The last 10 boyfriends that I had, they always left. So are you trying to leave me as well? So there's nothing about the fact that you don't value anything I say. There's nothing about the fact that you are not meeting my needs emotionally. There's nothing about the fact that you're always putting me down in presence of your friends. All that is important to you is that the last 10 boyfriends left you, and I'm going to leave you as well. So you are playing the victim. You are the victim. The last 10 people have left, and now you want to be the 11th person who will leave me. And of course, martyrdom is also very linked to guilt tripping, making you feel guilty about your decisions. If you leave me, I'm going to take my life. If you leave me, I'm going to harm myself. I'm not, and I need to say this very carefully, that sometimes actually people being jilted can actually lead to that. But if somebody is using it as an emotional weapon to actually control somebody else, then that's not a healthy place. It's not a very healthy place to be. I can see that Claire Newman has raised her hands, and I'm going to come to you in a minute. I acknowledge, okay. Sometimes I acknowledge that, and I'm just going to come to you in a minute, but I just wanted to quickly read catch up with the charts. Gaslighting is very interesting, yes. Sometimes the person don't know even that the action is toxic. That's true. Sometimes people who are toxic don't know. Gaslighting, yes, gaslighting, like I said, is really when somebody is playing mind games on you. They are twisting the information you give them. They are using lies and manipulation to make you doubt yourself, to make you doubt your instincts, to make you doubt your own judgment. And at some point, if it's intense, to make you actually doubt your own sanity. It's like, did I say that? Did I not say it? You're almost so unsure of yourself because they've continually fed you with lies and continually manipulated the truths that you're giving them. Emotional blackmail, yes, that's another one. Okay, thank you very much. Sapin Piggin says it's very eye-opening. It's crystal clear to know if our relationship with family or close friends and loved ones are toxic or not. Yes, thank you. Right. Okay. So the next point I want to make is this. What words come to your mind when you think of the word boundaries? When you think of the word boundaries, what other words come to your mind? Anything associated with boundaries? What physical forms of boundaries do you know? So let's go for that. Let's start typing in the chat in terms of boundaries. What sort of boundaries do you? What other words come into your mind when you think about boundaries? Okay, rules, good. Wall, space, good. Please, parameters, physical and mental respects of boundaries. Okay. Keep your distance. Yeah, I like that. limits, respect. Good. Yeah, Lua, thank you for that. Safeguarding. Yes, you need boundaries to safeguard yourself, and there's nothing selfish about that. Thank you for that. There's nothing selfish about really maintaining your boundaries. Priorities. Yes, very important. You know what priorities you are bringing into the relationship. Binding principles, do's and don'ts. I like that. Listening. Yes. Claire Newman says listening. Keep to yourself. Okay, that's an interesting one. Okay. So energy, time allocation. Yeah. Time allocation could, yes, it could mean, someone is just written in Yoruba, which means full stop, limits, standards, good fences, making good neighbors, okay, avoid limits, okay, rule of engagement, ooh, I like that, because rule of engagement is actually part of the thing. Protocols, yes, I like that. Protocols are very important. Okay, thank you. So we all have a fair idea of what boundaries are. Self-preservation, respect yourself, yes, absolutely. Now, good. So so let's think of all those words and let's think of them in an emotional way. how do we then translate those boundaries, the fences, the limits, the respecting yourself, don't come too close, all of those, the social distancing. So how do we emotionally social distance? All right. How do we self-preservation? How do we emotionally socially distance? So, okay. And that brings me to my next point, which is how do you create healthy boundaries? How do you create healthy boundaries? So what are healthy boundaries in the first instance? Every relationship that is going to thrive and is going to be fulfilling and is going to be purposeful needs boundaries. And that's something to write down. If your relationship is going to be fulfilling, and you remember we are talking about relationships across board now, it has to have boundaries. If it doesn't have boundaries, it's liable to toxicity and it's liable to abuse. And that's just the way it is. It's very important that we have boundaries. If we don't have boundaries, it just creates problems. So boundaries help us to feel safe, to feel healthy, and to feel comfortable. And that includes parenting boundaries as well. As children, for people who probably have young children here, boundaries are actually very crucial to the emotional well-being and to the emotional development of children. Much as we are not usually told, boundaries are actually good for children. Children might push boundaries, but in the real sense of it, children like boundaries. It makes them feel content and it makes them feel safe. So when we are not putting boundaries down as parents, we are actually setting up our children not only for emotional disturbances currently, but for the future. And also, we're also creating trouble for them because you tend to parent the way you are parented. You must be really very, very intentional in order not to, by default, parent your children the way you are parented. So when we are not setting boundaries for our children, we are actually doing them not just a disfavor now, but we're also doing them a disfavor for their future. We're actually we are perpetuating generational troubles. So it's important that we set boundaries because they make us feel safe, healthy, and comfortable. They preserve our energy and help us to engage in self-advocacy. So if you are feeling drained all the time in a relationship, emotionally, physically drained, like you haven't done any physical work, but you just feel like that, then there's something wrong. Maybe you need to put boundaries in place. Also physically, if you are all things to all men to the point in which you don't have any time for yourself, and I also know that there are ministers of the gospel in the room today, and that's something I'm always very keen to put out there, being a man of like passion myself, being honestly in a similar boat, that we need to be careful not to spread ourselves so thin that we are not no use to ourselves, because we have been spread so thin, and that we're also no use to our immediate family. That's also boundary setting, and it's very important. Boundary setting is an ongoing work. It's not something that you do and you just forget about it. It's work in progress. It's always happening. It's always evolving, and it's something you must continue to do and to continue to monitor. And it's influenced by our values, by our priorities, and our purposes. So as I'm saying these things, I'm hoping that you are reflecting: what are my values? What are my priorities in relationships? What's my purpose? Because all of those things are linked to your boundaries. Those are the things that actually help you to set healthy boundaries and to maintain them. So it's really very important to do that. And boundaries can be physical, they can be emotional, they can be sexual, they can be work boundaries. For instance, up until very recently, and I still try to maintain that boundary. Up until very recently, I told myself that when I leave work, I will not check my emails. And I still try as much as possible. In fact, up until I became a consultant, I said it was a no. There was no way I was going to be checking work emails outside of work. Of course, after becoming a consultant, there are times I've not really kept it. But as much as possible, I avoid checking my emails, work emails, outside of work hours. And that's a boundary I've set myself. And it's for my emotional well-being. Digital boundaries, that's a very important one. Digital boundaries, particularly for our young people. And just to put it out there, that digital boundaries are very crucial. There is now research showing that excessive digital time, screen time, social media time particularly, for young people has been linked not only to, it's been linked to anxiety, it's been linked to depression, and it's been linked to distorted body image. So anxiety, depression, and distorted body image, particularly among young girls. So there's a reason for you to maintain healthy digital boundaries. And for people who want to do that, as part of the resources I'm sharing, there's actually a Google link that you can go onto, and you can actually do a test. It will tell you it will assess you, tell you how well you are doing with your social media and digital use, and it will give you a tailor-made plan specifically for you. It's actually a Google tool. People don't know it, but there is a Google tool, and it's free. I've done mine. It gives you a file. You answer 5 or 6 questions, and it actually shows you how you are faring in your social media use, and it also tells you what you can put in place to control your social media use. Financial boundaries, very important as well. So how easy is it for us to set boundaries? How easy is boundary setting? And I'm quite keen to hear from us now as well. Please let's type in the chat. I'm quite keen to hear from us. How easy is boundary setting? Let's just type in the chat. Is it easy to set boundaries? The reality is that, in my experience, as a clinician, as a psychiatrist, I know that boundary setting is not always easy. And when boundary setting is not easy, and when boundary setting is a problem, it can potentially result in toxicity. What are the reasons why boundary setting is difficult? Who here? Please put up your hands. You can show by just raising your hands in terms of just indicating, raising your hands digitally. Who here does not like to be liked? just put up your hands, and if you are here and you don't like to be liked, then I would have to see you and tell and ask you what is your secret is at the end of today's meeting. But who here does not like to be liked? Just please, you can indicate by just raising your hands digitally. Say, I'm here and I don't like to be liked. It doesn't. Right. So I get your point in that regard, that you don't have to bend and go with everybody's flow. But really, as human beings, every one of us, there's a desire in us to be accepted. There's a desire in us to be acknowledged. There's a desire in us to be. It's part of our basic needs of human beings. So the reason why I asked that question was because most of human beings like to be accepted. Human beings like to be cherished. Human beings like to be appreciated. That's one of the reasons why we go into relationships, any form of relationship. So that's one of the reasons why we find boundary setting difficult. The other reason is because if we've not had role models in our life who have set boundaries and effective boundaries in our lives as children, then we might find it difficult to set our own boundaries, because we tend to parent the way we tend to take from our role models and our caregivers when we are growing up. The other thing is that in some cultures and in some settings, it's unacceptable to say no. Sometimes it's very difficult to say no in some cultures and in some settings, and that could include faith settings as well, where it's almost unnatural. You are almost expected to be all things to all men, and that can make it difficult to set boundaries. Lack of skills. It's not everyone is able to know how to really set those boundaries, and that's part of the things that we are talking about today. Stigmatization, the fact that some people feel that certain stigmas, people who set standards, people who set boundaries are rude and they are selfish, but that's not correct. It's okay. It's okay to actually set boundaries. It's okay to be able to acknowledge that these are my boundaries in this relationship, and I expect them to be adhered by. Because if you don't set boundaries, you can't give your best in the relationship. If you don't set boundaries and things get sour and it becomes toxic, it starts depleting you, meaning that you can't actually add again to that relationship. And that's why it's important for us to be constructive in a boundary setting, and to be it's okay to actually set boundaries. Yeah, right. So 12. These are 12 signs that you may actually lack healthy boundaries in your life. If you find decision making a challenge, if you find it if you are habitually guilty about saying no. You know, one of the most profound things that one of my friends told me years ago was this. He said his boss once told him that if you say yes all the time, what's your no worth? If you say yes all the time, how much is your no worth? Very important thing to think about. The reality is that sometimes we need to say no. And if you are habitually a yes person or a people pleaser, then it might be that you actually don't have healthy boundaries. If you feel that you are habitually taken for granted, you are chronically, emotionally, or physically drained, you feel you have an identity crisis. You've changed, you've molded yourself. Eukarya was saying something earlier about the fact that molding yourself to other people's standards. You've molded yourself to the point in which you don't know who you are again. Then there might be problems with boundary setting. Of course, the other one is when you have a morbid fear of rejection and abandonment. You will do anything just to be accepted. You will do anything, even when it's against your values, against your priorities, against your purpose. Then it's a warning sign that you are lacking in boundaries, right? So if you also find that you have resentment from being unassertive, you say yes to something and then you go home and you complain about it. You start, why did I say yes to that? Then it could also be a sign that you don't have any, you are lacking in healthy boundaries. Okay, good, thank you. Right, so this is not copyrighted. Most of the information I've shared previously are original content which I prepared, but this is by Ajayi Therapy. They're online. It's something I got online, so it's not my content. It's not my original content, and I acknowledge Ajayi Therapy for that. But this is a very good one to actually, I would advise people to take a photo of this, because if you can answer these questions, it can actually help you. B, please unmute. Please mute everyone again. Okay. Right. So if you can answer these questions, What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask anyone who has any questions. Let's leave it till the end. Please just note your comments and questions, because we still have quite a bit of content, and then we can go through that. So please take a photo of this. The reason I'm saying that is because this is a good template for beginning to set boundaries if boundary setting is a problem. It's a good template to actually consider. I'm just going to make sure that this is out of the way so that people can actually see. So it's a good template. How often do I worry about what other people think about me? When did I last say no to someone? Do I know them? What are the 5 rules to being my friend? Because if you don't know what you're bringing into a relationship, it's difficult to then express your needs. And that's one of the questions you need to answer. What are the 10 things I most like to do with my time? What are the 10 things I most like to do with my time? What do I even have strong feelings? What do I even have strong feelings about things? What are the 10 things I hate to do? Those are the things you need to discuss in setting boundaries. All right. Somebody's just being political there. So when I think about saying no to someone, do I feel afraid or calm inside? All of those are points that actually help us to see. So please take a photo of that. And like I said, it's not my content. It actually belongs to Hali Therapy. Right. Principles of healthy boundary setting. Clarity. We've talked about it today. Clarity. Yeah, you need to, it's very important for us to be clear about what I'm bringing into the relationship. What are my values? What are my needs? How much do I want to go here? What is the history of the relationships I've had before? You see, relationships are like onions sometimes. You are bringing in your past experiences, the hurts, the joys of other relationships. You are bringing it into this one. And you need to acknowledge those things. If you've been broken before, if you've been heartbroken before, you need to acknowledge that those are the things you are bringing into this fresh relationship, and you need to address them, because if you don't, they are going to play out in this one as well. Communication, being rational. Communication is about telling, after you acknowledge these values, the needs, the limits, the history, the onions you are bringing in, then you need to have a frank talk about really what your boundaries are. These are my boundaries in this relationship. These are what I expect. This is what I expect. These are the ways to meet my needs, and these are the repercussions. It's not threatening. It's just about, I would not stand. For instance, many times when you talk to couples who, for instance, are having violence in their marriage, many times, actually, when they were courting or when they were dating, they had that problems. Or when there's a perpetual verbal abuse, all of those things, or when there's emotional abuse, they've been present all along. But because they were not addressed, this is what I'm going to tolerate. If you lift your hand at me, that's goodbye for good. So those things need to be discussed. And consistency. You see, you are the ones that dictate how others treat your limits. You are the ones that dictate how others treat your boundaries by respecting your own boundaries. Because if you make boundaries and you don't impose them, other people will not impose them. A case in point, you see, I work as a full-time psychiatrist in the NHS, but I also think I have a full-time job outside of psychiatry in terms of public mental health, in terms of the charities I work with, in terms of being a member of my church pastoral team, and in terms of all the other things I do, mentoring to medicine. However, one of the principles, one of my boundaries is that I won't take calls that are not related to my work or respond to calls that are not related to my work during work time. That's just a boundary. Because if I do that, then I'm sending a message out that it's okay for you to call me for non-work related issues during work time. It's just some of those things, and those are boundaries that I've had to learn and to put in place. And one of the other things to do about setting good, healthy boundaries is checking in. You see, you don't just set a boundary and leave it at that. Review times. If, for instance, the relationship is toxic, one of the things you need to do is, okay, we are going to have this frank conversation. In 2 weeks, we are going to check in again, and where are we? It's not just a blank statement. We are setting boundaries, and that's it. Goodbye, have a good life. It won't work. We need to keep checking in and making sure that are we getting on with this boundary setting? Are we adhering to these boundaries? Then, commitment. Be ready to take action if required. In terms of, if you set a boundary and that boundary is constantly being pushed, that boundary is constantly being trampled on, you need to decide that this is where I'm going to draw the line in the sand. At some point, I might need to take action. Whatever that action means, I might need to take it. So, okay, somebody has asked, how can I build our self-esteem and make people recognize that I'm relevant in conversations? Thank you. That's a very relevant point. I've actually got we actually did a series on self-esteem, which I could signpost you to. Yeah, that's a very relevant point. Thank you. Right. Okay. So, okay, that was a skip. So basically, if you find that constantly if you have found out that you're in a toxic relationship, what are the things that you can do? What are the things you can do? I've made it, that's an acronym. You can either stay. Yeah, I've counted the loss, I've counted the benefits. The benefits outweigh the risk. I'm staying. I want to continue to be your friend. I want to, I'm going to go ahead in this courtship. I want to go ahead, or I'm going to stay at this work. I'm going to remain with in this work team. I'm going to remain on this job. I've counted the losses and the benefits outweigh the risk. So you can stay. But when you stay, it's also good to try and secure the relationship by putting boundaries down. So don't just stay and secure in terms of putting things down that can actually help you to that will not run you down. And of course, the other thing is you need to set sometimes you count the losses and you decide that, yes, I'm going to stay, but at a distance. There are people that you probably you decide not to interact with them on the phone. You only interact with them by email. There are people, for instance, that you say, I'm not going to physically interact with them. It's only going to be virtually. Those are things that you do to actually protect yourself. And those are things that work. It's part of your boundaries, the medium through which you interact with people. And then sometimes the only way to keep your sanity, to keep your mind, to keep your body, to keep your finances, to keep your health generally, and to keep every other part of you is to sever the relationship. That's not something I think should be done carelessly. Particularly, I'm not flippant here. I'm not saying, that's the next thing you should do. Particularly if one needs to count the consequences of this. But usually, it's better to break a courtship or to break to quit at the dating point than then have to quit when people are married. So, what are the things that will help you to know whether you need to sever this or not? I'm going to round up very shortly. Awareness. It's very important for you to be aware, and this is assessing the other party, the friend, the partner, whoever it is, assessing them. Are they aware that their emotions are toxic to you? Are they aware, for instance, that they have these anger outbursts that really make you intimidated and make you feel anxious? Some people are not even self-aware at all. They don't acknowledge that there's a problem. And if they don't acknowledge there's a problem, then it's a problem. Some people are aware, but they say, what's the big deal? Everyone has an emotional outburst. Everyone has an anger outburst. What's the big deal? It's not a big deal to me. It shouldn't be a big deal to you. So they are aware of the problem, but they are not acknowledging that it's an issue in the relationship. That is a problem. The third one is, even if they are aware and they've acknowledged that there is a problem, that this is a problem in the relationship, are they taking responsibility? Yes, I know I have anger issues. I don't like it when I take my anger out on you, and I take responsibility to address this. But it's not just verbal. It's not just a mental accent. It's actually taking action. I'm going to go for anger management. I'm going to hold myself responsible. I'm going to read books. I'm going to do things to actually address that part of me. And then the final one is accountability. Not only am I going to do all these things, I'm going to hold myself accountable to somebody. If you use these 5 rules, it can actually help you to decide when to quit and when not to quit. Because if the person you are in a relationship with, of any form of relationship, does not show any of these commitments, you can be sure that they are not ready to change. And if they are not ready to change, you then need to decide, am I ready to stay, or am I ready to live with what they've got to offer? Right. So this is really about confiding in what are the things that you need to do in order to recover from a toxic relationship. You need to get support, and sometimes that's professional. Sometimes it's from family and friends. You need to count your losses. What are the things? Poor self-esteem and poor self-confidence is usually one of the things that accompany toxic relationships. What are you going to do about that? You need to acknowledge that I've been emotionally damaged and I need to recover. Be intentional about your care. Be intentional about recuperating, emotionally recuperating, providing yourself opportunities to actually recover. Forgive. Resentment, anger, jealousy, strife, all of those things are actually linked. All those bad emotions are actually linked with poor mental health and poor physical health. So when people say forgive, it's actually for your own well-being. Detox your mind. See yourself in a new light, because not seeing yourself in a new light means that you are still carrying the image that abuser or that toxic person has imposed on you, and you need to come free from that. Give yourself time. Give yourself time to recover. It's very important that you give yourself time to recover. Right. Okay. All of this is going to be on. I'm going to upload them on the YouTube channel anyway. So, what are the things you bring into a relationship? Authenticity. Be yourself. Be attentive. Mutuality. Be willing to give, but also be willing to take. Reciprocity. Exchanging. Parity. Being at par, and confidentiality. Be willing to preserve other people's confidentiality. Be willing to preserve other people's confidentiality. And just as these are the further resources. Like I said, all of this is going to be uploaded on YouTube. So if you don't catch the resources now, you can always catch them later. This book, Boundaries: How to Say No and to Control Yourself, control your life, is a good one. And then this Spotify podcast is by Ella Dove. Ella Dove, the Well and Good podcast is a good one. Boundary Hunter is the one that actually talks about boundaries. And the world leading expert on narcissistic relationships, which is one of the ones that caused a lot of trouble, is Dr. Ramani. Dr. Ramani, she's got a YouTube channel as well. It's worth following her and checking out some of the content that she's given. Right, I can see. Thank you for everyone who has started giving your feedback. That's much appreciated. And we've done quite a lot of questions and answers today. And this is my contact details. Please contact us. And if there are still unanswered questions, I believe there might be some answered questions or unanswered questions in the room. Please, by all means, either put them in the chat or please put them in the or please send us an email or get in touch with us by social media, any of our social media platforms, and we will respond to that. So thank you, everyone. I know it's been a long evening, and thank you all for joining us and staying with us.